I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. Oh yeah, baby. It is Saturday, August 10th, and it is a weird day in Santa Cruz because we have high clouds and that doesn't happen here. So it's weirdly, oddly humid, which for West Coast is weird. Anyway, I'm happy to be with you, and it's a weekend edition of looking at one of the key roles in our government that affects our lives, the Speaker of the House. So today, I'll talk about kind of the history of the Speaker and that sort of thing, and then tomorrow we'll get into some of the current issues that revolve around the Speaker of the House. So these are just take a walk, go wash the dishes, put me in your ears, and just let this history wash over you, and you can remember what you know about the Speaker of the House. So let's start with the basics about the position itself. Back in the day, and I love this, we always go back to 1789. We all thought it was 1776. Turns out most of the stuff that went down happened in 1789. Right, that 1789 to 1800 period, a lot of the kinks were getting worked out on how this was going to actually happen. So I feel like they were in alpha and then they kind of got to beta testing, and then a lot of changes happened because the way our democracy works is it's an organic living thing, so we can keep adapting it to meet our needs as our country grows and changes. But back in the day, and this time it's 1789, when the first U.S. Congress convened, they decided to model the Speaker of the House position in the American government on the one that was happening in the British Parliament. It was called the Speaker of the House and Commons, but there was a really big difference. In the British system, and I hadn't do the history on Britain today, but it's kind of interesting because I know they've had changes too in how they run their country. But in the British system back then, in the 1700s, the speaker was really seen as an impartial player, and they would preside over debates and maintaining order, which is why when we watch British Parliament, it's so fun because they're like, sit down and sir, you are respected, and everybody gets to ooh and ah and make outside voice noises with their inside voices. And I love watching British Parliament, but I don't really understand it. And then you have the accents, and I'm like, oh my God, how can so many people from such a small space speak with such different accents? But that's kind of about me. I'll just move on. Anyway, the Speaker of the House of Commons was intended to be a little bit like a referee, right? Helping everybody. But in the U.S., what they really wanted was a political leader that was chosen by the House of Representatives by the majority party. So this is, it's an interesting difference that they're putting here, but they're really looking at these parties as being something that, but as really being an attempt at moderation. And I know I've mentioned before, but Ron Owens out of San Francisco KGO talked a lot about being a moderate, and he really believed the art of our democracy is that people take sides, but when we come together to work out our differences, we end up at this happy place in the middle. It may not be exactly everything we want, and we're seeing this today, I feel like, a lot with what's going on with Palestine, which is awful. I mean, just don't even get me worked up about this. But my point is that everybody has an opinion of how to solve it, but the only way this works, and this one's and Palestine's an interesting one, because the key stakeholders, really, I don't feel like the right stakeholders are at the table, which is, I think, some of the political problem here is that we don't have the right stakeholders at the table, because if we did, we'd have people really representing the citizens of Israel and really representing the citizens of Palestine, and not all the agendas that go on behind all of that. So there's a lot of nuance in trying to work these things out. And so I think it's interesting that that we've lost this concept of moderation and finding that place in the middle when there's two sides. So even as old as when we started the Speaker of the House role, we chose a speaker that was intended to be the representative, elected by the representative of the majority party. That still happens today. The first speaker, and then look, I didn't even finish the Palestine thing because I still strongly believe the stakeholders are not at the table. The right ones, the people whose lives are truly being affected. Okay, so much. That's about as deep as I'm going to go on Palestine because it makes me so upset. And if the stakeholders are at the table, there's no point discussing it because it's just a bunch of people with their own agendas. And that is not a path for working things out. Actually, the prisoner release we just did in the U.S., the one we got, That is a very good example of the right stakeholders at the table, because not everyone had prisoners that needed to get released, but almost everyone, and I think it was a 9-country coalition, had an interest in some part of this. And what our administration was able to do was figure out what everybody's interests were and come back with a solution that essentially worked for as many people as possible. There's moderation, there's coalition, and there's working things out in a way that it may not be a total win-win, because those are hard in politics, but it could at least be a win enough, and we got our prisoners out, and those poor kids had to go back to Russia and didn't even know they were Russian. But a lot of people's needs got met in this, because I believe that our administration was so good at getting the right stakeholders at the table. All right, let's put my soapbox back under my desk, because I am, if nothing, a communicator, and I do believe that words can help us work out a lot of problems. Okay, anyway, the first Speaker of the House was Frederick Muhlenberg of Pennsylvania. I'm not even going to pretend like I know that last name, although it looks kind of German, who was elected on April 1st in 1789. And at the time, the position of speaker was not really that powerful. Early speakers were more like facilitators. Still, they were elected by their party, nominated and elected by their party, the majority party, but they did still work more like facilitators of legislative business. If you think about it, in my world in marketing, we'd call those traffic managers or project managers. They keep stuff moving. And we know in today's Congress, stuff doesn't move. I've never seen things be so sludgy. It's really, right now with a GOP speaker, we really have a lot of sludge. And that's unfortunate, because we're not even negotiating. That's the downside. So, okay. So it's way back then when it was like a facilitator. And then we get to the 19th century, which is in the 1800s. I love how that 19th century is always the decade behind it. I don't know why we do that, just to confuse students, I'm convinced. So the speaker's role, again, now it's an active, living, breathing democracy, right? The speaker's role begins to evolve. And by the mid-19th century, the speaker is no longer just a facilitator, but a political figure, and a significant one at that. And this change was due partly to the growing complexity of our politics. And imagine we're adding humans that can't vote yet, because this is still in the mid-19th century, but still we're adding humans, and there is a need for more organized leadership within the House, because as we add humans, we're adding representatives, right? We learned that already in this podcast. The more people you get, you do the sentence, it's allocation of representatives. I don't know if we've added representatives. I don't know the last time we added representatives. I need to check that. That's a good question. I will take that and pursue that in an upcoming, when we talk about the House itself. Let's talk about how we add representatives. That's a good question. One of the most influential early speakers was a man named Henry Clay, and he served 3 separate terms between 1811 and 1825. And here's the deal, Clay, they brought him back 3 times. So first think about that. Over the course of, it looks like 13 years, if I can do math in my head, 14 years, they brought him back 3 separate times. And I think this is why. He was known for using his position as speaker to shape the legislative agenda, build coalitions, and he earned the nickname the Great Compromiser. Somebody go get Henry Clay, dig him up out of the ground. Let's bring this man back. His tenure was marked with a shift towards a more assertive and politically active speakership. So it's interesting. He was known for compromising, but the speakership itself became more politically active. I like that. I personally would like to see it work like that, as a person who could get people cross-talking, because I think this talking from both sides is really where we get to the middle. If you are interested in delivering a service to your constituents, which is the other factor in our politics that has really been screwed up by capitalism. And we'll talk about that later too. But if you're there to get rich, you're going to have a different agenda than if you're there to serve. I actually think if you serve really well, you're going to get rich, because people are going to be attracted to you. But that's been my plan, and I'm not rich yet. So I can only seem to attract a certain amount of people. And then I just hit my ceiling. Okay. So as this significance rises in politics, the speaker's significance rises, the power of the speaker continues to grow throughout the rest of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, which we know is the 20th century. And by that time, we get to Thomas Brackett Reed in the late 1890s, and he had the role of becoming, or he became one of the most immenseful influencers. Reed was called Tsar Reed, Russian, like CZAR, Tsar Reed, and he implemented procedural reforms that strengthened the party's power and streamlined the legislative process. But here's the thing. While Reed's successors continued to build on his legacy as being a czar, so that's a very heavy-handed political power, Joseph Gurney Cannon, who served as speaker in the early 1900s, so right after Thomas Brackett, who got done in the late 1890s, Joseph Gurney Cannon became the speaker from 1903 to 1911, but he was known for his iron-fisted control by his authoritarian style. And everybody revolted. And this is, okay, I'm going to Jen Carroll soapbox, I'm going to pull this out for a minute. What is interesting to me as I'm reviewing all this history for this podcast and looking at how our leadership has evolved and being able to look at it through our current lens, right? In school, you look at it through history's lens, but we're really looking at it through keeping democracy alive and our civic engagement. It is interesting to me that the backlash on authoritarianism is harsh. Like, authoritarianism kind of creeps up on us at different points in our history, and somebody will be that person. We're going to talk about the Red Scare and later in this process, because that was part of civic engagement as well, when everybody was outing each other as communists. Like, what the hell? Crazy stuff. But the point is, whenever authoritarianism seems to creep into our democracy, it exists for a while. It's usually a power play, and then it's rejected. And if you think that has parallels to what we're enduring, or enduring is the wrong word, it's like way better than enduring now. What we're doing today is that we saw authoritarianism coming again towards our democracy, and it's been creeping in. And I'll tell you, Project 2025 and the removal of women's rights to decide what they need to do for their own selves is authoritarianism at its finest. And we've seen the response, which is a backlash. Well, that's what happened to poor Joseph Gurney Cannon, who thought he was just living in the shadow of Thomas Brackett Reed, the czar. He was going to go ahead and just keep that authoritarian control, but it eventually led to a revolt, and that reduced the speaker's powers. So one of the reactions our democracy has to authoritarianism is we go back and put a check on powers. And I think we're going to see that happen with the Supreme Court now. As we're looking at how the Supreme Court has been corrupted and has been bribed and has been influenced, and it's actually got judges on it that are so unqualified. Guys, they just don't have any experience. We see that kind of move, and that's when we come back and say, no, this isn't how it works. We need to put controls back in place because we do not want our democracy to be run by corruption. So that's my soapbox. Let me put that back under the table. In the diminishment of the significance of the role, the speaker's role itself, like the title, Speaker of the House, became a key figure in American politics. It just really happened over the 1900s. If we think about it, I believe both parties came to understand how having a strong speaker really helped them legislate more effectively. And I think sometimes people are like, what is all this legislation? And legislation is really just rules that help guide our society. And they're really supposed to be big rules, and they're supposed to be not denying rights. They're supposed to support life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the rules are supposed to do. And of course, conform to the Constitution. That's really where we're at. So you can see that if we have rules that are falling out of that framework, we got a problem. So we're in the 1900s, which is just the last century of which I lived a great portion. And the role of speaker continues to evolve. And you get someone like a Sam Rayburn who served for 17 years. He was Speaker of the House. This is before my time. I think he might have been in there when I was. It's Sam Rayburn. I've heard everybody refers to him. I don't know. Maybe he was roommates with Lawrence O'Donnell. It's hard to know. But Sam Rayburn served 17 years, and he helped shape the New Deal and wartime policies during World War II. Yes, I was definitely not alive. Rayburn's tenure is remembered for his ability to build consensus while maintaining party discipline. And that's why according to history, that is one of the reasons he stood so long as our speaker, is that he was so good at building consensus and maintaining discipline. And just going to be careful here and note that party discipline and decorum just left the building. So I think it's possible to come back. I do think one of the things I'm liking about how the campaign has shifted is we're really trying to have a certain kind of decorum. Not, there's still going to always be name calling because I don't know what happened. I guess we're all still in 7th grade. But I mean decorum around ideas and decorum about listening to each other's ideas and slowing down enough. Just watching shifts from how someone answers a question to slowing down and taking even more time to answer the question. When our political candidates do that sort of thing and really listen, it's how they should be leading. They're here to serve us. They should be listening. In the latter half of the last century, so we're still in the 1900s, we're going to have some names some of you might start to recognize. We had a speaker like Tip O'Neill, who served during the Reagan administration and became synonymous with political battles of the era. O'Neill's clashes with Reagan over domestic policy, particularly regarding social programs, demonstrated the speaker's power in shaping legislation and opposing the executive branch. So what you can take from this is a good speaker is a good, if they're on the same team, parties, if it's a Republican president and a Republican speaker, this usually facilitates legislation. The Senate can still get in the way, but this is usually a good thing. If it's opposite parties, so you have a Democratic speaker and a Republican president, that's what they're citing here, Tip O'Neill being a Democrat and Reagan being a Republican. They can help find that middle ground, which is what I've been prattling on about. Finding that middle ground and being able to isolate the things that are important. And guys, man, I like Twitter because my brain just seems to like that. It likes to go fast. But it is amazing to me how many times people are spending time on things that don't matter. It just doesn't matter. There's so much that doesn't matter. And that's when you have good leaders who are able to take out all the garbage and focus on what matters, you really can find a middle ground. And you can come up with laws that please 3/4 of the people, and the people on the outliers really have exceptional needs or some kind of exception that needs a different kind of service anyway. So, this is ideally a very good thing. So here we go. The speaker's leadership in the last 30 years has really become even more important. So our democracy kept rolling. It kept changing. The new century began. And the Speaker of the House's role, it evolved again, mirroring the increasing complexities of our politics. And so we begin to see the emergence of one of the most significant figures in this evolution, who is Nancy Pelosi. She was the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House, and it started in 2007. Her leadership, and I'm still pretty angry with her about the Biden stuff, but her leadership in and of itself was and is amazing. It is a notable shift in power dynamics within the House of Representatives, and it's her leadership, her ability to whip the votes, count the votes, know if what they were planning was going to happen, and if it wasn't, this woman could do a plan B. And that, to me, when you're thinking of really what you want in a Speaker of the House, a Speaker of the House has to have like plan F, right? They really need to know, here's my optimum, here's my plan B, here is my minimum viable, acceptable things that I want. We call them minimal viable products in my world. But we have the MVPs, the minimal viable proposals, those things that matter the most. That's what you want in a speaker. You want somebody who's, and also able to manage their own party, because that can be a hot mess. There are definitely different coalitions within each party, even in the House of Representatives, which gives it some of its vibrancy and excitement. But you still got to be able to manage those. So if you look at what Nancy was able to do, she was instrumental in helping pass major legislation like the Affordable Care Act. Yay, Jen Carroll, who needed it, which remains one of the most significant pieces of social legislation in recent American history. But she also helped navigate these deeply polarized political landscape we've had in this century, the 21st century. Remember, 21st means it's got to be the 2000s. And she's maintained control over her caucus, and it was a diverse caucus. the Democrats. Very diverse. We've got some real outliers, and they need to have a voice. They're there for a reason, and people voted for them. So they have a legitimate role in being there. They have voters, so that's important. And she's really upped in her ability to influence and have responsibility to influence outcome in legislation. So Pelosi's leadership style is characterized by strategic discipline. There's that word discipline again. And understanding policy and politics. And I got to say, if you're looking at who to vote for, I don't care which side of the ticket you're on. If these people don't understand discipline, here's the characteristics you want. You want authenticity. So are they a straight shooter or are they a poser? You want to know that they have discipline. Can they be quiet to still meet their objectives? Can they stand back and let someone else talk? Are they willing to behave like a normal human being in normal social settings and to not scream and yell and throw out hyperbole? Are they able to stick to the point? And this one's really important because I think we all have forgotten how hard it is to write policy and to write policy that really represents us and that has a good chance of passing. And I think there's a lot of our politicians who are not focused on policy. They're focused on making rules. That's not policy. That's just not policy. Making rules is being authoritarian. Telling people what to do is authoritarianism. Telling people better ways to do things is leading. And that's policy. Okay, so she had such an impact on the role that the speaker's role is really so much more significant than it ever was. And unfortunately, every speaker after Nancy has to live up to her ability to run the board. She knew where things were. She knew her people. She knew who she could call on for favors. This is important for any speaker role. So you love or hate Nancy Pelosi, you need to look at her methodology, because if it was a job description, she really was managed to manifest quite a great job description for the House Speaker. All right, so I'm almost done. Sorry, I might have gone a little long because it's Saturday and I'm really chill. It's a nice day. Here's a few little tiny fun facts just to give you some color around this. For instance, good old Sam Rayburn, who I talked about, post-World War II and all of that, kept a portrait of his mentor, former Speaker John Nance Garner, who served as vice president under FDR in his office because it was a reminder to balance legislative and executive power, which is a really nice sentiment. And if that picture helped him to remember that balance, good on Sam Rayburn, is all I got to say. Another fascinating moment occurred in 1910, known as the Cannon Revolt. That is me doing sound effects. The Cannon Revolt was when Speaker Joseph Cannon encountered a rebellion from his party members. Cue. They stripped him of several crucial powers, including control. Oh my God, is this the Matt Gaetz story? No, sorry. That was just me being inappropriate. They stripped him of several crucial powers, including control over committee assignments, indicating a move towards a more democratized House. Yeah, maybe more democratized or somebody really got spanked. And then finally, a recent example, which we all remember because, boy, was that drama. In 2023, during the debt ceiling crisis, Speaker Kevin McCarthy was crucial in brokering a compromise between the administration and a divided Congress. Okay, that's some Nancy Pelosi skills right there. That's his whole job, is to broker a compromise. But despite the pressure from the party's conservative wing, McCarthy never navigated the high-stakes Let me slow down. I apologize for that. McCarthy navigated the high-stakes negotiations with a focus on preventing economic disaster. There you go. There you go. He focused on the most important thing, showcasing his ability to balance party interests with the practical demands of governing. And I share a story, and I don't know if I shared it with you before, but I had a chance to go to Israel a long time ago. It was maybe like in 1983. No, sorry, it was like 93. And it was a really fast trip. I was going for work and I met my team and everything, and that was really cool. But one of the members of the team took me back to his house, and I had a hotel room that night, but I never used it because he gave me an overnight tour of Israel and Old Jaffa, I believe is how it's pronounced. But the tour was great. But what I really loved, of course, Jen Carroll really loved this. I really loved talking to this man because he'd lived there for quite a while. And I said, as I hear in Israel, what I can't believe is how fast you've managed to manifest like a whole city and all these things. And what he said is that in Israel, they focus on pragmatism over principle. And in America, we focus on principle. And this is, now to go back to the Palestinian problem only lightly, I do believe this is an American problem. We often are not pragmatic and we often are principled. I am one of the most principled persons I know. And I've used this story to talk myself off the ledge, because I will fight for the principle, but sometimes that's just not what's most important. Sometimes the pragmatism of getting it done is the most important. And that's what this story about Kevin McCarthy is about. This pragmatism that he knew we were facing economic disaster. And to be the Speaker of a House during economic disaster is not a great job. He wouldn't want that job. So he actually worked hard to stave off our crisis. And it showcased his ability to balance the party interests with practical demands of governing. However, this is really important. This is when I talked back about what you want in a representative. However, the delicate balancing act he pulled off led to his eventual downfall, as he was ousted from the speakership later that year from hardline members of his party who felt he had compromised too much. I'm going to just say it. That is some kind of BS move. It is not how you treat your peers. And if you are pissy about it, you need to fight on it on decent terms. Now, I don't know all the details and everything, but I'll tell you from the outside looking in, it just looks bad for your own party to be that crappy, to be that not together. What, discollated? What's the word? Discombobulated? Effed up? You choose. But that was an uncool moment in speaker history. So I'm going to roll up this episode today. We've watched the speakership go from being simple and trying to just facilitate to becoming a real broker, a power broker. But always the best speakers here have been focused on getting things done. Pragmatism balanced with principle. And I think that's the key for this job. We will talk about this tomorrow. We'll talk about more about the pros and cons of the speaker's role and what the impact has been on democracy and what we're really looking at, hopefully, in the near future. And I'm really glad you tuned in today. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.